folks, brothers, sisters, others of all. Oh, shit. Brothers, sisters. Oh, there we go. Brothers, sisters, and others of all colors. Welcome back to another YouTube video. This is, NB, Quinn, and I wanted to go over an episode of My Little Pony Friendship is Magic. This is going to be a quick sort of review. Before I was doing it, like, I was just sort of going off on it all at once. I did it live, but I figured that I kind of just want to give it a quick overview and say what the episode did, right? But anyways, we're talking about season 4, episode 14, Putting Your Hoof Down. This is the episode where Fluttershy is trained to be assertive, but takes things a bit too far. And growing up, I learned that, I watched Mr. Enter's review, and I agreed with him because I agreed with basically everything. Which is, it's a long story, but yeah, I agreed with him on the episode, but I personally paid the episode no mind when I watched it myself. It didn't like hurt me on a visceral level. But I watched that, the Mr. Enter review, and also this episode is kind of personal to me because I'm someone nowadays who has a lot of trouble with assertiveness. Whereas like, back in the day, I was like super just like balls to the wall when it comes to assertiveness. Like I would just like, okay, I'm just going to go immediately after whatever I want. Or if I disagree, I'm just going to immediately just say my opinion. Even though I wasn't the smartest cookie in the jar, and I did have like some gullibility when it came to people. But I was very assertive, and now I'm not as like immediately assertive. I'm a little bit more cowardly than I was back in the day. But anyways, so that's what this episode meant to me personally. So like when I review this, I'm speaking from like personal experience with like my own sense of assertiveness. And yeah, so if you haven't seen the episode, I would suggest going and seeing it. But yeah, for the most part, I think that most of the things that Fluttershy did was justified, and most of them, and that despite the fact that some of the episode didn't feel it was pretty contrived, and that a lot of the world kind of conformed to whatever the episode wanted to say in that moment and whatever the plot needed to be. I think that's just how cartoons worked back then. And I think that's kind of how cartoons work now. Even though you do have shows, and I'm not saying that the bar needs to be that low, but I do think that there are shows for that. Now, I don't think that the bar needs. I don't think that's like a deal breaker to me. Basically, it's not a deal breaker that the show is contrived, or I would have quit the show a long time ago. I would have stopped watching it. But it's funny, and because it's slice of life, you have to judge it on more of its individual episodes rather than the state of the world at any given point, right? And even then, even if you were to say it was contrived, I would still kind of disagree, because like there are definitely times where like you have a bad day and everything just seems bad. Like everything bad just happens. And it's fucked up, but that's what it is. But yeah, like sometimes you just sometimes there's just days where everyone's just a fucking dick. So I don't even think it's that unrealistic necessarily. But in the context of the world, it's a little bit of a stretch. In the context of a world where most of the characters are pretty friendly, I do think that it is contrived. I do think like they just kind of like made it the fuck up, basically. If you don't know what the word contrived means, um, but yeah, it's one of my favorite episodes in the show because it shows the gritty and realistic nature of real growth as a human being or as a character in a way that's like, yeah, sure, it's a bit exaggerated, like as in a cartoony way, but then it comes around in such a grounded and balanced angle that like you're like, oh, it makes sense to me now. This is how you're supposed to do it. So going over, let me try to elaborate on that a bit. So basically, Fluttershy starts off as too little of something. Her friends tell her, hey, you know, the world demands more of you, right? So the world demands more of Fluttershy, and it demands for her to step out of her comfort zone in order to get what she really wants. So she ends up, taking dramatic action and taking Iron Will's seminar. She changes her identity, and then she learns that that identity has downsides, and she messes up, but it never really makes her the good guy. It never makes her like, oh, hold on, like her fucking up in the episode, like of course, like she's taking it too far, and a lot of the time, and like when she's like, especially when she throws punch on Pinky, like that's fucked up. When she roasts her friends, even though her roast was like, she's kind of a truer, like I'm not even capping. Like if somebody goes up to me trying to tell me how to live my life, and I don't respect the way they live theirs, like nah. Like okay, even though she is like technically kind of right, the way she said it was fucked up. There. But what I liked about the scene was that while she did take it too far, and she did feel very guilty and did take it too far with the guilt where she literally ties herself up and boards her house, like, hmm? Like she takes it too far and then she like sort of swings back the other way. But at the same time, she's like, in a way, she's kind of right. Like, think about it like this: your homies roll up and they don't like the new person you've become. And despite all of the bullshit she went through that episode, think about that. Think about all the bullshit she went through that episode. With Angel treating her like garbage. With all those people in the town treating her like garbage. With that guy trying to extort money from her. With the guy cutting in the taxi. Cutting her by jumping in the taxi. By the lady who, just ran in front of her and bumped her out of the way. Think about that for a second and be like, like all the bullshit she went through that episode. And like imagine going through that and then somebody trying to tell you like, hey, you're kind of taking things a bit too far. Like of course she's taking things a bit too far. She's been treated like an asshole the whole episode. So of course, like I would blow up too and act like I don't know nobody. And that's exactly what she did. And she ended up roasting the life out of her best friends and made them. She doesn't make the emotions; they make the emotions. But they were really sad about that, and there's a better way to go about that. But the fact is that she kind of lost control, and half of it is just reasonably how one should respond. Like, because like if you've ever been in a situation And again, this is like, I hate to go back to this point, but like, think about like, there was a time where you learned something and you look back on your life and you realize that so much of your life could have been so much better if the things that you've learned didn't happen. So like, the best way to describe this is with something like, racism. You may not understand the extent that that might have affected your life, but looking back on that through that new lens, through that understanding, you start to see all of the times where that shit has affected your life and you see the consequences of that. For me personally, it's looking back at my trauma, looking back at my past, and seeing that this shit is fucked up. So much of my life has been taken from me from this bullshit. The reason why I am kind of a doormat nowadays is because of this trauma. The reason why I do act kind of fake sometimes is because of this trauma. I'm trying to fucking save myself. But you look back and you feel nothing but fucking anger at all of the shit you've lost. And there's a part of you that kind of like gets a little bit too over enthusiastic about the stuff you've learned. I relate so much to Fluttershy in this episode. Like, again, when I learned about like stuff like atheism, stuff like spirituality, stuff like diet, I took all of those things way too far. Because I learned what my life was like without him. When I learned about these things, I was like, holy shit, I've been lied to this whole time. My entire world flipped upside down when learning about these things, when getting woke, as they say. And yeah, I kind of get it. This is why people act fucking crazy on Twitter. This is why people appropriate, or perhaps appropriate and overuse academic terms, because they learn about this stuff, they get it, and then they're just like, they see how it's affected their lives and it feels so real to them that it kind of overwhelms them in that moment. And they start to overuse terms, right? They start to, get too excited with identifying this thing that they have seen in the world. Um, it makes total sense why she'd act this way. And by the way, oh shit, I'm running out of time. But Iron Will, towards the end of that episode, like Mr. Enter said that Iron Will is like fucking being treated as like a good guy or being treated as like a bad guy that episode. He's not. He was never treated like the bad guy that episode. Rarity and Pinkie Pie had perfect reason to believe that Iron Will had been indoctrinating them after what they just went through with Fluttershy and after seeing all the shit that Fluttershy did. Like, they're like, they don't have the information to say that, Iron Will didn't fuck things up. All they know is that Iron Will was involved and that she's now an asshole. Um, but, she draws her boundaries in a reasonable way and Iron Will respects them. But he's not a bad guy. That's the thing. That's the beauty of this episode. Is that there are no bad guys in this episode. Iron Will's not a bad guy. He's just a guy who just like has some flaws in his program, has some flaws in his thinking, but he gets around. Anyways, that's it.